Hi guys, welcome back to
Welcome, yes indeed, welcome back.
Forensic Facts. I am your host, Angelique Cushman, and as you have heard, I have a guest with me today on the show. Guest, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Leah, and I'm the guest for this one and only podcast.
So today we're going to talk about hair and its use in forensics and, well, murders and stuff.
Lovely stuff, really.
But the first thing to understanding hair, we're going to talk about basically the way it looks underneath the skin. Scientists call the skin the epidermis. So
Latin-y.
Yes, based on Latin. If any of you all take Latin out there, homies.
Homies?
They're my Latin homies.
Latin homies.
Yeah.
Those words go together.
But the epidermis, it protects all the stuff underneath and stuff. Hair, it has its own little hole in the epidermis. So the epidermis sort of creates, it's like this little tube. Well, I shouldn't say tube, but it creates like a little pore for the hair to come out of.
A pocket?
Yes, a pocket. So the hair comes out of that skin pocket with its all special protection-y stuff, and has also little things for like the hair to get connected to nerves, and we'll dive deeper into that in a second. Okay, so, well, this is the second. The nerves, which are there are blood vessels called the papilla, and they bring the nutrients to the hair, so they connect through the epidermis to the hair itself. And capillary, which are teeny tube devices. Well, they're teeny tubes, not really devices, but teeny tubes that connect to the hair, and they transfer liquid, so that's how your hair would get water and all the stuff it needs to, well, be a somewhat living thing. Attached to the hair casing pocket thing is the sebaceous gland, which secretes oil onto the hair. The best we can say about the oil that's secreted by the sebaceous gland is that it's when you don't wash your hair, and sort of like to preserve your hair and keep it all nice and clean and alive, the sebaceous gland secretes it then. Sweat glands, they're sort of divided into two categories. There's the eccrine gland and the apocrine gland. The eccrine glands are the ones we're more commonly familiar with. They're the ones all throughout human bodies, and they just release sweat whenever we're really hot and stuff. So hot days, you're sweaty, getting sweat in your eyes, you can't see where you're going. That is because it is hot. And then apocrine glands are attached to the hair like sebaceous glands, but these are actually more controlled by emotions. They secrete the same type of oil, but basically, like, if you're talking to this really hot person and you're getting super nervous and your hair gets, like, kind of oily, that's why.
Or when you're doing a podcast and you didn't write a script.
Shh. This is spur of the moment. We're being conversational, Gotta entertain those listeners out there.
Only Miss Miller. Only Miss Miller.
You're breaking the fourth wall.
It's a project.
It's a fourth wall.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Okay, the life cycle of the hair. So, in murder cases and stuff, generally...
And stuff.
Yes, and stuff. Sometimes you can use hair to track people, possibly. But in the way that we're looking at it, we're sort of looking at it from the perspective of a murder case. So normally in a murder case, if you're going to find hair, it might be clumps that someone's ripped out of another person's head, which is really painful because hair is actually attached to nerves, but we're sort of going to gloss over that fact. But the hair life cycle goes into the stages of anagen, catagen, and telogen. The anagen phase is the growth phase. It's when your hair's like a little newborn hair sprouting and growing constantly. It's the only part of the human body that really doesn't have restrictions on how long it's going to grow. So for the amount of time, it grows from like 2 to 7 years, and in those 2 to 7 years, your hair will not stop growing ever. That's why we cut it and like make it pretty, and apparently it attracts people.
And dye it awesome colors.
Yeah, though that's probably not healthy, so I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, unless you're really passionate about having cool-looking hair.
Yes. Yes.
But the way the growth phase works is the root divides from inside its little skin pocket, and it's added to the shaft, which is what we see, what everyone looks at and admires on a day-to-day basis. And little fun fact about that anagen phase is it grows 1 centimeter every 28 days. So it's a slow process. No comments? Okay. The catagen...
I don't have a comment every time.
I'm going to expect it.
Oh, no.
The catagen phase is the sort of like the death of a hair. It's called the regressing phase. It's the end of active growth. It lasts for about 2 to 3 weeks, and in that, your normal hair turns into what is called a club hair. And that's when the follicle, the thing containing all the DNA and connected to the nutrients and the water and stuff, it detaches from that and it attaches to itself.
And it's called a club hair because it looks like a club.
Oh, yeah. Like caveman clubs, you know? Sticks with the giant, like, heavier end.
This is a podcast, Angelique. Your gesticulations aren't going to be transferred.
It helps me understand, and that's important for me to explain to the listeners.
Listeners, plural.
Yes. And the club hair is essentially dead because it's not receiving nutrients or water anymore, but it's still in that little skin pocket. The telogen or resting phase lasts about 3 months, so the hair stays in that little hair pocket, and it sort of just sits there. And that's how it is for 3 months. But it has the DNA because the follicle is officially attached to the hair. So there's no reason that the follicle should really remain in that pocket. A fun fact about the telogen phase is we lose, as humans, about 50 to 100 club hairs a day. So, you know, if you're in the shower shampooing your hair, you come out with your hand having a bunch of hair in it, and it doesn't hurt, those are a bunch of club hairs, and they should have follicle and DNA. So, someone knows where you shower?
That's not a fun fact. That is not a fun. Such an amazingly jovial fact. Just people know where you shower.
Well, I mean, if you dispose of your evidence, you know, clean up that hair.
My goodness gracious.
And 70% of hair can actually be put, like, stressed into the telogen phase. So, like, if your hair is under enough stress, your hair can, like, skip, like, it can end anagen early, skip, like, be in a short process of catagen and end up in telogen. So that is the hair life cycle. Now, next thing we're going to discuss is ethnicity and actually identifying hair. The only thing I would mention about ethnicity is you shouldn't identify hair, like you shouldn't use your hair to identify ethnicity. Like they have a large majority of similarities, but hair generally coincides a lot of characteristics between the 3 ethnicities that scientists divide people into. The first scientific ethnicity are the Negroids. Those are generally described as blacks in today's social standards. They have really the smallest diameter range out of the 3 ethnicities, so about 60 to 90 micrometers, which are like super small. So like if you try to take one specific strand of your hair, you notice that your fingers are basically touching, trying to hold that hair out apart from everything else. And it has a flat cross section. So your hair, the way that it's like put together, it's flatter than most. So a human hair has like this layered structure to it. So inside of an onion cell, which looks like a bunch of flat ovular circles all sponged in together. You have a comment, Leah?
No comment.
No comment?
No comments.
No comment on the onion layer imbricate thing.
Just a bunch of Shrek jokes playing through my head.
Yeah, sure. So it's flatter than most. So, another characteristic of Negroid hair that is commonly shared amongst Negroids. Remember, you cannot identify a person's ethnicity based on their hair, or you should not. But they have dense and clumped pigmentation. So what makes their hair color is that pigmentation, and it's thicker than usual. So what makes their hair dark is that dense pigmentation, and the clumpness of the pigmentation sort of deals more with the way the hair looks.
This is why we have scripts.
Shh. I don't want to be that kid.
What do you mean, me?
No, shh. Okay. But dense and clump pigmentation. There is no cuticle to the hair, and there is prevalent undulation. Undulation means that the hair is wavy. So Negroid hair is generally really wavy. Moving on to the Caucasoid ethnicity, this generally includes Americans, Europeans, Mexicans, and Middle Eastern people. Their hair, it's sort of like the middle range. It's 70 to 100 micrometers. They have a more oval-like cross-section, so rather than the flat onion-looking layering of the hair, it's more
Voluptuous?
Yes, voluptuous. Thank you, Leah. So the cells.
Always here for your pronunciation needs.
Yes, the build of the hair is more ovular. It's larger than Negroid. It has even pigmentation, which means throughout the entire hair it almost looks continuous, and it's most likely thinner than Negroid hair, so it's evenly spread out, and that creates the pigmentation of a Caucasoid, the color of a Caucasoid hair. It has a medium-sized cuticle, in like comparison to all of the cuticles, and uncommon undulation, which means Caucasoids do not commonly have curly hair, or wavy hair is a better description, but it's possible for them to have just a little bit of it. The third ethnicity that scientists classify is the Mongoloids. These are identified as Orientals, otherwise known as Asians, and Native Americans, which are the people who were in America before Americans. Shh. And
I didn't say anything.
But you gave me a look. And they generally have the largest range, which is 90 to 120 micrometers, and a round cross-section. So there's the Caucasoids, well, there's the Negroids with their flat, Caucasoids with their oval, and Mongoloids with their circular. So that's in comparison to those. Their pigmentation is actually a dense auburn, which is more in reference to the color of their hair rather than what it's like on the inside. So like how most Asians people in America classify as they all seem to have the same hair. That's because they have the same color pigmentation. They have a thick cuticle in comparison and no undulation, which means absolutely none of them have wavy hair. I mean, unless you're of mixed ethnicity.
Or you take a curler to it.
Yes, or curler. But, I mean, that kills your hair.
I should curl your hair. It look nice.
They don't see my hair. The audience would gain nothing from seeing my hair curled because they do not see me.
I'm not saying now. Yes, I'm going to bust out the hair curler right now and curl it just for the benefit of the
listeners.
Audience.
Yes.
Singular audience.
There's always one audience with multiple people in it.
There is.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we're going to move into the parts of the body. This is much more stable, I guess you could say, classification. The parts of the body have similar characteristics to them, and it's a much more...
It's not subject to as many inconsistencies.
Yes. So, like, even if you are of mixed race or anything else, these are generally going to be the same for pretty much everyone. Yeah. But primordial hair, that's basically the 3rd month of gestation. That's when you're a fetus in your mother's stomach. So you're just barely a thing. You're a human, you're alive, but you're not much of anything yet. But that is hair that's on your upper lip, eyebrows, palms, soles, which are the bottoms of your feet. And they all have little small hairs. They're sort of a bit thick, but they're thick and they're harder than the hair that comes after it, which are the languano hairs. Those replace the primordial, and the primordial shed and Leah, say that for me.
Say what? 6th?
Yes, month of gestation, which is still before your birth, but you're more developed now. So the languano hairs replace the primordial. They're softer than them. They're softer than the primordial. They're finer than the primordial, but they're unmodulated, and unpigmented, which means there's no color to your hair yet. There's no medulla in there that sort of tells you, hey, this is what my hair is. This has this certain color to it. It's smooth and indiscriminate, which means there's no way you can tell who the person is by their hair. We only see it on infants. Well, not really infants, but fetuses that have been aborted, and we only use it in investigating infanticide, which is when someone illegally aborts an infant, which is probably really painful. Yes. And then vellus hair and terminal hair both replace the languano hairs. Focusing on vellus hair right now. Vellus hair is fine, soft, unmodulated hairs spread uniformly over the body. They're less than 2 centimeters, and they, of course, replace languano hairs. Those are sort of everywhere, as I said, by all over the body uniformly. It's more the hairs that you can't see that keep you warm. The terminal hair is specified as your hair on the scalp, your eyebrows, eyelashes, and later on when you hit puberty, pubic, axillary, which is axillary, I believe, is like the face, chest, back, arms, and legs. So, like, if you're a guy and you get really, really hairy when you hit middle and high school, that's the terminal hairs. And your usual hair and your eyebrows and eyelashes, which it's unusual to be born without is terminal hair from birth on. But those also replace the languano hairs. And I believe that's enough over the parts of... No, there's more to be said about the parts of the body. Because that just sort of tells you what kind of hairs are on the body. But let's sort of talk about the characteristics of each. I'm only going to discuss with you the characteristics of the hair on your scalp, which is the hair that we style and stuff. Pubic hair, I understand it's a bit uncomfortable, but, you know, it has the largest difference from the scalp hair and such. And just an example of beard hair for the axillary. But beginning with the scalp, the hair that everyone sees and admires, it has the longest growth. There's really no limit. Typically, people cut it between 100 and 1,000 millimeters. It has
Rapunzel.
Yeah. Well, she had a godmother who was restricting her.
Rapunzel, let down your terminal hairs.
Yep. And
so it ruins the flow.
But it's right. And it has a small root. So what's underneath the scalp, there isn't that much underneath your scalp. So not much there underneath the epidermis, if you remember the words I used earlier. It has a tapered tip, which is like when you cut your hair, generally referred to as, you know, a cut. But as it grows, it comes back to a tapered tip, which is it thins down into a point. And various modulation, which means each and every person has a different kind of medulla in pigmentation, as you can see by looking at anyone around you. Pubic hair, that's generally the hair in places that no one wants to see. Those can grow to from about 10 to 60 millimeters. They have a coarse diameter with variation of the diameter. There's no strict set or observable set that we've been given, that we found in our research. There is a broad number of medullas that can be had, not as many as you can find on the scalp, so there is a chance that your scalp hair can be a different color than your pubic hair. And there are these things called follicle tags. I understand you're uncomfortable here. Which help us to better identify a person by their pubic hair. There's an asymmetrical cross-section. So it's a bit wild. It's not uniform in the way that the hair is formed. It can sort of be straight, curved, or spirally tufted. So there's no... It's a better identification of a person by DNA, but it's much more... It has a larger variety in the way that it looks. A beard hair, that's axillary. Anything that pubic or axillary, depending on how you identify it, which comes after puberty, specifically on males. It's rather coarse. It can grow to be about 50 to 300 millimeters long, and it has a large root with irregular structure. So you can tell there's so large root. It goes into your skin more. There's also, if you know the skeletal structure of a face, there's more room for your beard to sort of grow into your face. With irregular structure, no one really knows how their beard's going to turn out after puberty, so, you know, sort of luck of the dice. And a triangular cross-section. So it looks a bit different structurally underneath as it than like the scalp hair. So like rather than those nice layers, it has this strange little spikiness to it. And complex modulation. So it's got a different medulla than the way that the hair on your head is. So generally they're going to be the same color, but probably they probably look different in the way that it forms on your face. And that is really all we're going to discuss about the difference in body hairs. And one thing before we get into an example of how hair has been used in forensics, we should talk about human versus non-human, because those actually it's a very important distinction in a case. Our specific case.
It'd be really bad if you mixed up someone's cat for them.
Oh, yeah. Hey, you're a cat! Obvious human. But in the specific case example we will have, there's both a use of human hair found and non-human. There's really aren't that many similarities, even though animals and humans, although we are also animals, are all mammalian. But we use different terminology and such for both for some reason. Humans, their hair is, like, the protein that makes their hair is known as keratin, where in animals it's known as pelage. That's really the main difference in how they're made, and how they look and how they act, in a sense. Animals, their hair only grows to a specific length per each animal, and it can be coarse, and it should be coarse and short. Animals don't really have the variations that humans have in their hair. Animals also have this thing in their hair. I believe it's the pelage that controls this, that restricts the amount of growth an animal has in their hair. So where a human's hair will grow as long as it can with no restrictions, an animal's hair can grow only, like, for example, 5 millimeters long. And it will stop once it reaches that point. And it falls out actually in altogether. It cannot come out separately the way that human hair does. Human hair is generally soft and long in comparison to animals, and there is no temperature regulation, where animals have this special coat that's determined by their hair follicle that protects them from the weather. And stop petting me, Leah. Don't touch my hair.
I'm demonstrating.
Yes, you're demonstrating for our audio audience.
It's what you always do.
Yes. And it protects them from the weather and heat and cold, depending on the time of the year. One last sort of distinction between human and non-human. Humans have very thin medullas, so about 0.33% of the, well, not 0.33%, but yeah, 0.33% of the hair is formed of the medulla. The animal hair can be about 0.5% or greater. And there's different kinds of ways that the hair is structured. Human hair is called imbricate, which I explained earlier in the ethnicity section, how it's like this layered thing like onions, how it's flat and whatnot. Animals have this thing called coronal and spinous hair. So say I need that. So coronal hair is sort of like if you imagine the petals of a rose. If we've all seen roses.
Long story short, they're really scaly in comparison to humans.
Yes. Well, I would say that's more of a spinous example, but coronal it goes upward and it looks like a whale fin, and then the one underneath it sort of layers on top the way a rose does, and it continues like that. And as Leah has supported, the spinulous one is more scaly-like. So if you imagine a snake, it looks sort of like a snake. And now then, to the highlight of our podcast.
Our 30-minute long podcast.
I will wrap this up very quickly.
This has a life.
Yes, I know
she has a family.
I know. But the idea is people listen to a podcast because it sounds awesome.
Two nerds making Shrek jokes at each other. That's
yes,
awesome.
Yes, onions, because onions have layers.
And I know I made that joke like probably 15 minutes ago, but when you do it, it's so much more lame.
Okay, the highlight of our entire podcast, the case study. We only have one case study for you guys. I hope that you all go and do your own extra research, that you find this inspiring and interesting enough to go and do your own research on hair and its use in murder.
It's always the teacher.
Shh, shh, shh.
Of course she does that.
Shh. Okay. But the case we have for you today is the murder of Leanne Tiernan. Basically, we're just going to sort of skip to the evidence they used. So Leanne Tiernan had a scarf on her. She was strangled by this scarf. And they found hair on that scarf that actually belonged to the murder. And they had enough hair on that scarf to find mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondria is the portion of the cell that gives the cell energy, otherwise known as
the powerhouse of the cell. That's never going away. It will never go away in my life.
Yeah.
I'll be dead in the coffin, and I'll be talking about how the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
If any of you have gone through elementary school science, you will know of the mitochondria. But the mitochondria carry their own DNA that you can identify people with. And this DNA matched with a man named John Taylor. And to further the evidence found with the hair, there was actually dog hair matched somewhere on Leanne Tiernan's body that matched John Taylor's dog. So they were able to determine that through the structure of it and what we just described to you as the coronal and spinous structures and the differences that we sort of just talked about between humans and non-humans. And they identified it to be John Taylor's dog, but they did not, unfortunately, use this in the case to further prove that John Taylor was the murderer because the dog had died before the case. But they were able to put this man behind bars.
No, not the doggy.
Yeah,
the
unfortunately,
doggy, no.
The dog that apparently was in contact with the murdered. Yeah.
The murderer.
No.
Not the murdery.
Well, but the hair was on the murdery.
It was on, but indirectly through the collar.
Oh, yes. But Leanne Tiernan's murderer was put behind bars more because of that wonderful mitochondria DNA that they found in the hair and blood.
Powerhouse.
Thank you for listening to our Forensic Facts today. Again, I am your host, Angelique Cushman.
For the one and only podcast.
And this is your guest,
Leah.
Yes. Goodbye.